you're stewarding more than just work. Like within creativity, you're stewarding people's ideas, their emotions, their identity, really, because a lot of what they're making is coming out of who they are and their worldview.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Church Circle podcast, the podcast where we just sit down with people in the church, whether it's creatives, pastors, leaders, volunteers, people doing cool things with ministry or whatever it is. And I just love getting to sit down with great people, having great conversations. And this guy that we're having on today, Matthew, I've been chasing this guy down for a year to be on this podcast. We met about 4 years ago on Instagram. We just talking. We had our 4-year anniversary of the first ever live stream we did back when IG Live was a thing. And so he's a great friend of mine. We got to meet this year in London earlier this year. I think, was it this year or was it last year? It was this year, right?
It was last year. It was the end of December.
Okay, December.
Yep.
So we got to meet last year. And so this is in person. I've seen Matthew's legs. And so it's just, I'm just so glad that he's with us finally on the podcast. But he's got a lot of cool stuff to talk about. I will intro him properly. It's Matthew Pahl, who's based in Lynchburg, Virginia right now, at Liberty University. So when we met, he was a designer for Church Media Squad, but now he's a creative director, executive creative director at Liberty University. I will let you do more of your introduction, Matthew, so you can let people know more about who you are and a little bit about your story. But yeah, he's a great friend. So glad he's on the podcast, a great guy to talk to as well. So we're going to have fun over the next 30 minutes or so. But Matthew, fire away. Let us know if people don't know who you are. I'm not sure how. Let us know who you are, where you're from, a little bit about your story.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it was great finally meeting you in person. The funny thing is you were always trying to come to the US to meet all the creatives over here in the church space. And then somehow I ended up in London and ended up meeting you over there in your territory, which was great. So thank you for showing me around. Went to a lot of different art galleries, snuck into museums. It was great.
It was. We had maybe 3 or 4 hours together or something. And it was we had to cram as much stuff in there. So we did 2 museums. If you've ever been to London or if you ever are in London, let me know. I'll give you a personal tour of some of the museums there. But yeah, it was good fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Like Reuben said, I'm Matthew Pahl. I am the executive creative director at Liberty University. This was never my plan or path. I feel like God's been redirecting me at every stage of my life. And so, every chapter has been God building into me exactly what I needed for today. And I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and I got into design during MySpace days. If any of you guys remember that, I was working with Coral Paint Shop Pro, which is before Adobe Photoshop. And I was designing custom layouts and profile pictures and selling them to friends and just learning design that way. And I got into a lot of it in high school where we were learning Adobe Illustrator and Adobe Flash, which is not a thing anymore, and ZBrush, which is this 3D sculpting. It was a lot of creative programs, but I really fell in love with just the creative side of things. And I applied to the University of Illinois to where I got into this art program. They do it weird where you have to apply basically into your major the second year. And so I got denied to graphic design on my birthday going into my second year of college.
Oh, man.
And it dropped me back to general studies, which basically I thought my life was over because all I wanted to do was work in the sports industry, work for Nike or Leo Burnett, like a branding agency. And so to get dropped to general studies and that not be a thing for me anymore was pretty wild. And so I went into advertising, which was actually great because I got a lot of the sales perspective, which you'll see later. But I got back into graphic design in my junior year, which made me stay for 5 years. And so I ended up going and learning a lot about not only advertising and sales, but the creative side of things. I love people. I love creating. And so merging those together was great. I ended up moving out to Cleveland, Ohio after the University of Illinois after I graduated, and I got a job in sales management of all things. And I was managing 40, 50 students across 15 different campuses every year. And they were selling custom apparel and promotional items on those campuses. And basically what I learned there is a lot of the high level strategy and business and structure and processes that I wouldn't have gotten if I had just jumped into kind of like a junior creative role out of college. And so, yeah, I moved to Cleveland, And I got called back to faith around 2018. The owners at University Tees were Christian. So many stories there, but I ended up coming back to faith in 2018, and I felt this call to ministry. That's when I let the owners know about that, and they allowed me to create and design for churches and ministries while I was at work, which was insane. And they just believed so much in where they felt like God was calling me, and they allowed me to do that and helped me in it. And then I ended up at Church Media Squad, where Josh Sorensen took a chance on me with a minimal portfolio. I couldn't get in there now. How they're functioning now, I wouldn't have a chance. But
I don't
he
think
took a chance on me, and yeah, he's awesome. And so I worked there for about a year and a half, and then I moved out to Lynchburg, Virginia. Again, another crazy story, but I'll keep it concise. So now what I do here is lead a team of 10 full-time creatives, about 5 to 7 student workers at Liberty University.
Yeah, I feel like you just underplayed the last part of what you said. Like, if you go to Liberty's Instagram, or you go and see anything they do, even go to Matthew's Instagram profile, which would definitely push at the end. You go to any of those channels and you look at what Matthew and his team have created, it's insane. Like every single piece, whether it's LED screens, visuals, whether it's brochures, flyers, whether it's merch, whatever it is, you look at it and you think, how does this person think of so much detail? And firstly, my brain would explode, and then my laptop would explode at the same time with the amount of layers you guys use.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the attention to detail is second to none.
Thank you.
And I think if you want inspiration, I know there's people in the circle that I've spoken to before. Greg, little shout out to Greg there, who's one of them. He really looks up to you, Matthew, and we were talking to him the other day, and he just loves the attention to detail that you have. And I think a lot of people look up to that as well, and just, yeah, it's insane. So if you want some visual inspiration, if you want to go, I need to up my game, and you want some motivation to do that, go to Matthew's Instagram, go to Liberty's Instagram, just look at what they're doing and go, okay, I know where the benchmark is. And so thank you for what you're doing for the church in general, for creatives. Thank you for what you're doing for creatives in general. I know that your reach is now stretching further than just the church world, and we can get into that a little bit maybe later on. But yeah, so this is going to be a great conversation. And this is mainly kind of focused on creative leadership, but I think we'll kind of go off on a few tangents as well. But if you are in a position where you're leading creatives, if you're in a position where you are in a creative team, you want to know how to be either a better, person to be managed by your manager or leader, or whether you wanted to be a better leader yourself, I think it's going to be a really helpful conversation. So let's dive into it. Let's get into the meat and potatoes. What do you think makes creative leadership different to other types of leadership? You said you've been in sales before, so you've kind of had this experience of different areas. Obviously, there's going to be some crossover, but what are the things that make it unique?
Yeah, I think just looking at both sides, I think the big difference is you're stewarding more than just work. Like within creativity, you're stewarding people's ideas, their emotions, their identity, really, because a lot of what they're making is coming out of who they are and their worldview. And so in a world where success is really objective, like you got numbers and you got goals and you got things to hit, creativity, that success is really kind of subjective in a sense, if outside of the brief, right? And so there's people, they have this pressure to innovate and to build, but to what end and why, and how is that viewed? And there's a lot of insecurity and inner, what people are wrestling with. And so you're kind of like a part, you're setting expectations, giving clarity, you're part cheerleader, and then you're part therapist. Like you're trying to figure out what people need and trying to meet those needs and really unleash kind of what's inside them, what God has gifted them with. So I think it's a lot of like, you're not just managing work, but you're managing the people and their identity and stewarding that well. And I think it's just like I said, it's inherently personal. Like people are creating out of who they are. And so when you're giving feedback, especially from my end, it's tough because it can feel like rejection of self. Like it can feel like when I'm giving critique or feedback, it's not just about the work. They take that personally. And so we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but it's kind of managing that excellence with grace, right? And so I guess like I'll talk about this book later, but Todd Henry wrote a book called Herding Tigers, which is incredible. And he basically mentioned how I guess managing creative people is like herding tigers, because you're basically hiring these brilliant and driven people, and then you're trying to get out of their way. Like you're trying to give them the trust and autonomy to go, not micromanage, not hover. And so there's a lot of different dynamics that you have to be aware of as a leader, high level of emotional intelligence, self-awareness of how you're approaching people, so that they can continue doing their work at a high level, and kind of moving forward. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the difference is like as a leader in creative, I look more at emotional intelligence versus systems and processes where I did in sales. And so it really differs there in how in it you are with your people and how well you know them.
Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like sales and things that have a metric to them is very pragmatic. It's like, okay, this, did you do this well or not? It's kind of clear in the data. Whereas with, like you said, like it's such an emotional thing. And when we say emotional, like I think, I'm not crying while I make stuff, but there is such a personal element, and there is, like you said, like your worldview, your background, and even who inspires you goes into what you make, and then you kind of put all this out there, and you're like, this is what I think looks good, and someone has to then go, actually, does this fit the brief? Is this what it should feel like? Especially, for Liberty, you guys have an aesthetic, you have a style, which is you're constantly developing, but at the same time, it's like, if someone comes with something completely different, you're like, okay, does this really fit? I know you've put a lot of effort into it, and there's a lot of emotion and personal, effort that's gone into this, but at the same time, like, does this fit? So there's definitely that tension and tightrope to walk. Is there, from a leadership standpoint, like let's say a pastor's listening to this, or a leader who manages a, creative team or gives the brief to these creative teams, what's the one thing that you wish more leaders, more pastors would kind of understand about creatives?
Yeah, I think, well, you kind of hit on it where you were talking about the subjectivity and the briefs and whatnot. I think there's a big thing where people feel like creatives want this freedom and a lot of lane to run in this wide open space. And really what I've seen on my end is like creatives need clarity and a direction to go, but they also need the trust and autonomy for you to let them own their roles and solve those problems. And so what I've had to learn, and this was a couple mistakes that I made early on, was that when I was in critiques or feedback, a lot of my subjectivity was getting in the way of their innovation and their growth. And so I would come in from my subjective lens. They hit everything objectively. They covered the brief and they're hitting the target, and it's going to impact, and it's great work. But subjectively, I might have wanted to change this or do that. And what I was really doing is I was creating this culture where people were then just going to make things that, oh, Matthew likes, right? And it was going to stifle their growth, and they were never going to be able to innovate or risk. And if that's the culture I wanted to build, I couldn't always come in and go, change that color. Or if you go to my Instagram, up that hue and saturation and contrast and all of that, right? So I had to figure out how to balance both those things, where creatively we're going somewhere and our direction is cohesive, but subjectively I'm okay with going certain directions that I might not have 100% done myself, but I think are still great, and I think they're going to accomplish what we set out to do. So there's a lot of that. Is just this balance of like, once you're a leader, it's not about control and about it's more about you're kind of giving the trust and autonomy and allowing people to grow and almost outgrow you in a sense. And that's kind of the goal. And so, yeah, I think that's one thing. The other thing is talking about the increased emotional intelligence. Like if you are a leader in a creative space, like that's one of the number one things you should be looking at. It's because you're not just stewarding that work, you're stewarding the people. They both matter. And so you have to be able to get in it with your people and understand what they're going through and what their needs are. Because there's a lot of different personalities across that creative spectrum. So yeah, I think those two things would be huge.
No, it's really good. And I think you can see that at work as well. Like there is definitely an aesthetic that's built at Liberty, but I don't think it's limiting, I think the creative, you can see the creative flair as well. And I think that's a really hard thing to do, because you've got these brand guidelines. Again, you've got these emotional beings, you've got all of these things that are at play. And I think as well, like in recent years, churches have started to move away from churches, and organizations have started to accept that social media and what goes on your social might not be necessarily in line with your main brand guidelines. Like not everything has to be so matchy anymore. But then that creates its own helpful. Yeah, it is. But it creates its own complexities as well, because that was the objective thing you could point back to before, right? And now it's like, well, if we're going to kind of give some slack here, if there's something I don't like that doesn't line up with this brand guidelines, I can't use that anymore as a kind of like, I have to say I don't like it. But then again, that gets kind of back to your point of like, are you putting a limiting factor on the team? One of my 100%. Favorite things about working with a team is when you work at like conferences and stuff. I love working on conferences because the one thing that I can do, it's maybe a small piece. Okay, it's merch or it's LED graphics. I don't know, something small like that. But then you see that in the wider context of what we've created as a team. And it's like the video skills and the copywriter skills and the web skills, all of those things come together. And you're like, wow, this project is so much further than I ever could have done on my own. But that is part of the releasing control, right? And trusting. Yep. And I want to just tap into the trust side of things a little bit, because I think this is really important. You know, trust is one of those things that takes a long time to build, but it's one of the things that can be broken in an instant. So I think it's really hopefully helpful to people listening if we can find some ways to help build trust and build a healthy culture in a team. My question to you, I guess, is how do you practically build healthy, creative culture that's high trust, especially when you've got that mix of personalities, skill levels, preferences? How do you do that?
Yeah. And I mean, culture and trust go hand in hand. I'll separate them for a second, but the trust side of things is one, this goes without saying, but you have to serve each person uniquely, right? Like if you have this one size cookie cutter approach, one size fits all, it's never going to work. And so what we do at Liberty is we'll have everyone come in and do personality tests, not to put them in a box, but to understand their strengths and their wiring. So everyone will do Enneagram, we'll do the Strengths Finders, we'll do Myers-Briggs, and then we have these compensation languages. And I take all of that for each person and try to understand, okay, where they're at, who they are, how they're wired, and then try to figure out the seats and the roles and the positions that they can be in where they're going to thrive individually, and they're going to be excited and passionate, and they're going to grow. And so a big part of that is really looking at each individual and going beyond the work and seeing who the person is and understanding their needs, and then putting them in the right seats to succeed. And then there's this level of like psychological safety on a team, right? Where they have to be, if you're going to champion a culture that innovates and takes risks and we change and we're agile, well, then they have to be comfortable to fail, right? They have to be comfortable to speak up and voice concerns, because consciously or subconsciously, people are always thinking about their job security, what's next for them, their career growth. And so if you're in a spot where they're voicing concerns or they're taking risks and they're punished in a way because of it, where let's say somebody takes a risk on a project and then they might have missed the mark and now you don't put them on the next one, well, then they're never going to take a risk again, right? And if they bring up a concern and now that stifles their career growth, well, now they're not bringing up concerns and they're not going to be transparent with you. And so there's a level of as a leader, how you respond in those moments, the psychological safety that you create on your team, which then leads in stability, it leads into a thriving culture. It's all of that. But you also have to lead yourself, right? Like I have to model what I'm expecting. And so am I consistent in my words and actions? Am I doing the things that I'm asking other people to do? And so there's a level of trust that's built through that, just by not what you say, but what you do, right? And so I think those are the big things. And then again, trusting who you've hired. Like you can say, oh, I trust you to go after this and do this project and get this done. But if you're constantly micromanaging and you're hovering over every part of the project, well, they're never going to believe you. And so honestly, trusting who you've hired. And on our end, we have a team of, it's multidisciplinary. So we have designers, photographers, videographers, motion designers, social media managers, and content creators, copywriters. And so I don't even pretend like I know more than any one of them, because there's so many different disciplines. And that's why we've hired them. They're brilliant people. They're great at what they do. And so I will create the clarity and the expectation, but I'm going to trust you to handle it. And I got to do that in my actions, not just in my words. So I think those are a couple of things that help with trust and kind of lead into talking about culture and how to build that even more intentionally.
Let's be honest, managing the resources of a church is no walk in the park. But what if you could have stunning designs without breaking the bank? Or a team to craft your newsletters and create and schedule all your social posts? Enter Church Media Squad. They're here to help you save time and look incredible, so you can pour more energy into your congregation and less into your laptop. And get this, they save each of their partner churches an average of 15 weeks of work every single year. That's a game changer.
Ready to learn more? Head to churchmediasquad.com and discover how they can help your church today.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe we can dive into that a little bit more. Is how do you? And I've got a couple of questions here, but I think maybe we'll kind of talk about managing tension, because I think that's quite important, and that can kind of feed back into building culture. You mentioned about excellence versus grace, and I think that here's a good example of, like, if I design something that's like may not be going, out to the masses, it may not be like the front page thing or like the on the LED wall or whatever, but it's not very good. Like, do you take the L in that moment? Do you just go, okay, let's just move forward? Or do you go, actually, like, this isn't excellent and we need to change this? Or, but that's at the risk of, either offending or stifling that person creatively. Like, how do you manage that tension? And have you got examples where you've done that before, where you've gone, actually, like, we've had to just move forward with something I wasn't super happy with, or I've had to really scale that back, but then I've had to rebuild trust in this way? Like, maybe just expand a little bit like that.
Yeah, those are, man, you're hitting the key stuff of, like, the tension you live in as a leader. I feel like when you're talking about excellence and grace, they're not opposites. They got to work together, because if you have excellence without grace, you're just crushing creatives and innovation, and you're sowing doubts and insecurity. And then if you have grace without excellence, well, then you're straying from the mission, you're settling, you're not putting out great work. And so you got to figure out how to merge those together. And so I think what's hard in my role, and anybody that's reviewing work, is, like, you have creatives that are putting hours and hours into a project. And me personally, like, generally, I only have like 5 or 10 minutes to review this and to give that feedback. So it puts us both in tough positions. I don't have enough time to appreciate the effort that has gone into this, and you don't feel like I'm appreciating the effort. And so there's a level of, one, you have to start to call out what's working, not only because it's a good thing to start with, but you have to also show the creative, what did they do well? Like, what is hitting the mark? Like, what do you want to see more of, in a sense? Mostly what gets celebrated gets repeated. And so there's a level of not doing it out of flattery, but genuine and authentic in terms of what's working here. Let's talk about that first. And then you can go into what's not working and separate the objective versus the subjective. Like, if they're not hitting a brief or it's off brand, like, we can be clear about that, and that's objective. There's sometimes, like you're talking about, there are subjective lenses, and I'll generally approach those from the scale of the project and maybe the lifespan of it. And so if there's something that is going to live for an entire year on our campus, well, let's really hone in and get that right. Do it with grace and patience and empathy, and talk through it and make sure we align together. But there's other things where there's less effort that would go into it. And maybe it's a social post or a story or whichever. And I need them to focus on bigger projects that have a longer lifespan. So there will be times where I might not fully align with something in terms of my subjective perspective that I'll push through, but to know, and I'll comment on where I thought, something maybe I wanted to change this or do that, but I think it's really hitting the mark. I think it's great, and we'll move that forward. But yeah, it's an interesting balance of how to give feedback without stifling that creativity, and without, sowing those seeds of just like doubt and insecurity in their gifting and who they are. Because ideally, I want to build their confidence and help them grow to step into all that God has for them. But there's definitely times, like I talked about, when you're giving that feedback, you can feel really personal and kind of as a rejection of themselves. And so try to balance that well. And that comes with the high emotional intelligence and having the empathy and sitting with people in that and having those, kind of conversations. So yeah, I think that's a lot of where I go with it.
That's really good. It's true as well. Like, if you think about us in our creative journeys, if I look at what I made 5-6 years ago, I would be happy with what I made back then. Like, I wouldn't be happy now with what I made back then. So even the subjective lens of each person changes as time goes on. And so, if you come with your experience and say, let's say you're 5 years down the road as a designer, let's just use designers for example. Obviously, there's different spheres that you operate in, but let's say design. If you say to this person, like, hey, I don't think this is hitting the mark, I would hope that the creative that's being given that feedback can understand there's also a experience thing. There's a understanding, like you said, like even just like looking at the bigger picture. Okay, what's the longevity of this thing? And like they can trust that. I think again, this comes back to trust. Like they can trust that, okay, you've got the experience to know like when's time to just move forward, time to move on, time to make some changes. And yeah, I think like I try and remember that when I get feedback personally of like, this is not for me. This is for the bigger picture, whether that's for a church or an organization, whatever it is. But also like sometimes what I think looks good now, I cringe at in 2 years' time. Sometimes it's even a year. I'm like, man, did I really make that a year ago? It's so bad.
Yeah.
And like, I have to come in with the humility of like, I'm not always going to get things right.
100%.
And I'm not always going to have the best, taste or the best opinions and stuff. And there's definitely far more talented creatives than me. But, I'm doing it for the bigger picture. I'm trying to make it here. And if this is not hitting the mark with my leader, then I just have to accept that, okay, this is something I need to change. And that releasing of that and not holding onto it so personally and understanding that my taste probably will change really helps me to go, okay, we can move this forward without me being like emotionally attached to this thing.
Yeah. And humility is like, that's a big thing that both sides need to have in that.
Sure.
Like as a leader, I can't come in and go, I have this many years of experience. What I say goes. Like I'm actually going in there and asking questions and trying to learn as well. And so I have to be humble in terms of how I give that feedback. They have to have humility in how they accept it. But that also revolves around what we just talked about is trust. If they believe that you have their best interest in heart and the mission, and they believe that you care about them as a person, that feedback loop and those conversations are a lot easier. But if they feel like you have some hidden agenda, a different motivation, a different to try to prop yourself up maybe for your own status, for your own benefit, now they're going to be a little standoffish. And so trust and humility just go hand in hand with that as well. And it just permeates everything within the scope of a team and culture and all that. But yeah, you hit on the head there with that.
I think the personality test is a really good idea. And I think just focusing on the relationship part of things and building a relationship with those people so they can actually see who you are as a human first.
Sure.
And I think then that connects to how you are as a creative. And I think coming from that perspective first, as opposed to knowing the creative first and then learning about them as a human, I think
Exactly.
you're going almost you're going against the flow, right? So like you understand the human and it flows out into their creativity. That way you can kind of get on board with what they're doing and see how they're doing it from their perspective.
Right. Exactly.
What are some rhythms or practices that you've found? I think especially you guys work very in seasons. I guess obviously you've got college, I don't know what you guys call it, but like college terms. There's big intense parts of that season, and then you kind of have some rest periods. But how do you help your team avoid burnout? How do you keep that culture healthy and thriving while there's all this intensity as well?
Yeah, well, first, there's a lot of things that go into architecting culture and avoiding burnout and capacity and workload distribution, all that stuff. That's the stuff I love. I live in that world on the macro level. I love the systems and processes and kind of building something like that out. A lot of where it starts is, there's so many angles, but first I have to model it, right? I think I did this wrong when I first came in is I was going at 100 miles per hour. I was working after work. I was sending Slacks and emails after work. And it starts to create this expectation of like, oh, if Matthew's working, like, do I need to be on? And then also if I'm not on and others are, do they have a better chance at a career growth, another position? And so I was creating this culture I didn't want to create, but it was out of a good place for me. I was trying to be ready and prepared for the team and to serve well, but it was coming off as like, we're kind of always on and we're never off. And so I had to basically pull that back completely. And we implement a lot of systems around it where we have a woo tracker, which is working out of office. And so if you work anytime outside of our normal hours, our 9 to 5, and there's different things there, but you have to log it with us. And it's not as a punishment. It's that so I can make sure you're not working out of office. And so we'll figure out, hey, is time being managed well in office, or is it a workload issue? Is it a capacity issue? What do we need to shift? What do we need to delegate? So that's one system. And then our director of ops and communications, he's awesome, William Faber. He does midweek check-ins. And so he'll go around to every team member in the middle of the week and he'll check in on how they're doing, not only to see how their projects are progressing, but also like, how are you feeling? Like what's going on? And we'll figure out how to shift and delegate. We do it often, almost every week, when those check-ins come in, just to make sure people aren't like, we understand where people are at, and then we can alleviate some of those things. And then I have one-on-one. So every month, I meet with each team member for about an hour. And there's a whole thing around that where we'll go through, basically we'll talk not only about work, but about personal things. We'll get into shout outs. We'll do heat checks. We'll do discussion. And heat checks are, we have team values, and the values are there's proactive growth, team player, ownership and accountability, party time, which is culture ownership, transparency, encouraging others, bearing good fruit. And I'll just go through and have each person rate themselves 1 to 10 on how they feel like they're doing in those areas. And that really gives me a barometer of like, okay, what areas do I need to press in more on? And I start to basically ask the right questions and listen well to, I guess, reveal kind of the pain points and things that are happening. So I'll understand and hear a lot about what you're talking about in those one-on-ones, and see those kind of orange flags before they turn red. And then I'll go to our leadership and try to figure out how we can alleviate those things. So there's so many different, I guess, things that go on that are all playing into, let's make sure our team is not only being prolific, in their output, they're brilliant in what they're creating, but they're also healthy at the same time.
Yeah.
And so we've implemented a lot of systems over time with that. And then we have seasonal sprints. Like, our video team will be super heavy in the first couple of weeks of school. Our design team will be pretty heavy in the summer going into school. And so I'm very aware of who's on those teams and when those seasons are, so that I can constantly check in and start to see signs of burnout. A lot of it is when people are isolating or they're disengaging with the team, not because they want to do that, but because they're so locked in over here.
Yeah.
I'm going in as like, hey, you're doing a great job, but how are you actually doing? Like, are you okay? Like, do we need to move anything? And so them just seeing that from me, from me knowing kind of what's going on, being aware of where they're at, I think helps as well. And they freely kind of let me know where they're at, and I have to act on that. Because if I'm just asking just to do it as a formality, it doesn't mean much. And so, yeah, I think it's a lot of those different things. And then flexible work environments, we have different systems around that as well.
I think we could do a whole, like you said, before we joined this episode, we could do a whole episode or whatever it is, like video on just kind of, I love getting into the in-depth things. I think people like seeing behind the scenes of some of those, like, okay, like even just explaining the heat check thing is like, okay, that's a really cool idea. I'd love to like explore that deeper at some point. But yeah, that's so good. I think there's again, it goes back to the relational thing, right? Like, there's so much value. I think so often we just focused on what we're producing as a team. We're like, got to get this out. And you just lose all the relational stuff. And it's the relationship stuff that keeps this whole thing moving together. And then out of that, again, that flow of people working together comes like the good creative stuff. So I'm so glad there's people like you leading those creative teams where, it's not just creative teams being crushed on a daily basis by their workload or by, poor feedback. It's like, now there's people out there who are leading creatives well.
Yeah. And there's something where it can't just be me that's owning the culture. Like, it takes everyone, and everyone on our team is so great at this. But like I said, one of our values is party time, which is basically owning culture. And everyone, and kind of around that is like, everyone is owning it, right? You're not just a beneficiary of it. So everyone's stepping into those things. And I think, well, we also created something called the PCP, which is the Party Planning Committee. And there's like 3 of them. No, there's 2 of them now. But what they do is they're basically focused on how do we celebrate the team well as a team, and then individually, like birthdays and things like that. So we have a whole dedicated team of like, how do we celebrate well and encourage versus just like talk about work. They'll plan team outings and things outside of work and whatnot. So there's a lot revolving around keeping a team healthy and thriving. And I think a big thing is I think there's a misconception that if you have an open door policy and you kind of put that out there, that like you're going to hear from your team and you're going to know what's going on. I think you just have to go a step further than that. And we do a lot of that through surveys. The one-on-ones do that, where I'm asking the questions, but we'll have surveys every single semester we'll ask the questions to get into like how I'm doing personally, like I'm inviting that critique, and then how our team is doing. And then we'll have big team meetings and we'll rank kind of what the problematic areas are, and then we'll rank action items, and then we'll come together and figure out a plan for that. So we're never just sitting in neutral and coasting. We're constantly trying to figure out where these bottlenecks are, these inefficiencies, and we're continuing to be agile and change and shift so that not only can we thrive as a team and do what we need to do in our mission, but each one individually is also going that way. So you got to be intentional as a leader to go to your people and really seek out those questions and those answers, but also to act on it and not just do it as a formality. So there's a lot of that goes into culture as well.
Yeah, and it comes back to intentionality, integrity, walking it out yourself. And one of the ways I've noticed you do that, you've talked about this a lot, is you read a lot. Like you consume a lot of leadership's content, a lot of leadership stuff, and also just creative stuff in general. What's one book?
Love it.
I think we kind of know you mentioned it earlier, but what's one book that's really shaped how you lead?
Yeah, that's that is the one I talked about. This blue book, Herding Tigers. It says be the leader the creative people need. This book is incredible. One, it talks from a creative perspective, which a lot of leadership books don't do that. It's really the only one I've seen that is really dove into the practical side of how to lead and shape culture and manage people and whatnot. And we actually read this book with the Passion City creative team. We did this about 2 years ago. So everywhere from designers to videographers and photographers were on those calls, and we went through with them. And then there's another one that I think is huge. If you don't like that, John Maxwell, who is the GOAT, he wrote this book, Developing the Leader Within You 2.0. And not only have I read this 4 times, I've also taken people through it. And so it's very practical. If you're a new leader or somebody who's trying to get into leadership, that would be the first book I would read, is Developing the Leader Within You. And then if you're trying to get into creative leadership, I would go into Herding Tigers. If you read both of these, like, you're prepared. You're set for what you need to walk into, because time and time again, things that when I was reading and they didn't really apply to me, I'm now seeing 2 or 3 later. I'm jumping in those conversations, being in those situations. I'm going, that's what they were talking about. And so a lot of it won't make sense right away, but it's going to be stuff that you'll experience in your years to come if you're going into that kind of creative leadership.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. It's like you don't have to read it for where you are right now, but where you might be in the future, and then a lot of these things will make sense. So that's an encouragement to me as well. I think, like, I've had to read a lot of parenting books over the last couple of years, or at least a few.
Sure.
And a lot of the times I'm thinking, like, this is about like a teenage daughter, or this is like a teenage son. I'm like, I've got a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old, but if I don't know those things now, it's going to come back to bite me, because those years are going to fly. And so just trying to get prepared on those things is, my wife's much better at this than I am about reading and learning these things. But
sure.
I will definitely check out those 2 books.
I feel like you have to be a learner, right? Like, I feel like what I see from your content and just who you are and your growth and development, like, there has to be a level of, like, you love to learn and you're curious, right?
Yeah, I think conversations with people is one of the things I really do well with and learn from. And I watch a lot of video content as well, but my book absorption isn't very good. I need to change that.
That's fair.
I think, like, I don't know how to, like, sit and read, and my wife's like, just listen to audiobooks. But I'm like, I can't take in I'm such a visual learner. I can't take it unless I'm reading it on a page. So I will have to get better at that. But yeah, Herding Tiger is one of those ones I've keep seeing pop up, and I know it's a really good one, and I need to read it.
Get in there.
Couple more questions. Just want to make sure. By the way, just so you guys know, it's 7:54 for Matthew right now, a.m. He joined this podcast at 7 a.m. and he is bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like he's been awake for like 6 hours.
We were up at 5:30.
Yeah, so this is a key example of living it out. So I want to be conscious of Matthew's time, because he's going to go to a job after this. So a couple more questions here. How do you carry your faith into your leadership? Especially because you're actually, relatively, you said you recommitted your life in 2018, but that's quite a short span between, let's not say baby Christian, but kind of starting at that point to now being in a quite a high position of leadership in a Christian college. How do you carry your faith into that? And maybe I can just bundle that in with the last question, which is what's been the biggest lesson that God's taught you in the last 12 months?
Yeah, I think, well, first, I think you can't just carry it into your leadership. I think it has to be at the center of it. I think it has to be at the center of everything, right? So, I mean, if you just look at a wheel, you put faith at the center of that, and the spokes are, family, finance, fitness, your career, creativity. I think faith is permeating all of that. And so how you show up and how you function your day to day, like that has to be at the center of that. It has to influence everything, not just your creativity and not just your leadership, but every area of your life, right? That's also a lot of what some of these books go into. But I think what's been challenging at Liberty, and I hadn't experienced it before, is I'm around these spiritual things so much that you can easily go, oh, I'm being fed. I'm working events where we're hearing preaching 3 to 4 times a week. And so that's convocation, campus community, and those happen throughout the week. And we have speakers come in, honestly, the best speakers from all around. And I'm hearing messages from them. And you can easily, but I'm working those events, and you can easily walk away and go like, I'm being spiritually fed. In reality, you're not, right? And you have to take ownership of your own faith journey and spiritual growth. And so that looks like, for me, getting involved also in a local church and serving and having local community and getting outside of that, just like bubble where you're going, I'm around spiritual things, so I'm good. It's like, no, you have to take ownership of that for yourself. And so I think a lot of my barometer when and this is actually one of our team values, is bearing good fruit in the workplace, is like that love, the joy, the peace, the patience, kindness, the goodness, the faithfulness, gentleness, that self-control. That's my daily barometer of like, if I'm not showing up with joy, if I'm not having patience, if I'm not loving well, like what's wrong here and what do I need to shift and where do I need to go? And so I use that as kind of, as you can see, I have a lot of systems and tracking, and that's kind of from my sales world, but that's another part where it helps me to really evaluate and be self-aware of like, how am I showing up today? Because a lot of how I'm showing up is how my team is going to go and how they're going to function. And so I have to be living that out if I'm expecting it from them as well.
Yeah, that's really good. I like the spoke analogy. Like it does, a lot of it just comes out of that. And I think I guess a good like metric is like, am I more like Christ at the end of today than I was at the beginning?
Sure,
and
exactly.
Like that simple question can unfold itself into all areas of life. Someone once said to me, and I remember talking to him about it, I was like, if you work for a Christian organization, but you you see this as, I guess the way you're being fed, is that okay? And he was like, no, it was like your work is not your church, if that makes sense. Like what you take in it on your 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, even if it is a Christian organization, it's not going to spiritually feed you the same way as going and being part of a church, a local church would be. And so that's something that stayed with me that whole time. Is like, yeah, that's something I'm glad you're conscious of, and I'm glad that's something you've been learning, because it is a really important thing. It's like you can be surrounded by all, if you're working conferences and events, you'd be surrounded by all this amazing speaking and the Spirit's moving, but you're still doing your job. You're not there to receive necessarily. You might be there to receive second, but you're there primarily to get the job done. And so that you can't be in that position of faith coming second all the time.
And I think also I didn't answer your second question, but I think the biggest lesson that God has taught me in leadership over the past 12 months is a lot of like, when I look at maybe dysfunction or tension or insecurity or just like disengagement across the team, I'm realizing a lot of that is because it's a sign of someone's unmet needs. Like I wasn't there personally, right? And so a lot of people, when they don't feel valued or seen, or they have a voice on the team, or they have a direction that they're going, or they're truly part of this mission, like it's going to show up in those ways, but it's not the root. And so I've struggled with this, but my natural instinct, like I said, with sales is to build systems and to track things and to solve problems with processes. But I feel like God's reminding me that, first and foremost, it's about people, the people over the product, and the real breakthroughs from that really come when I'm in those one-on-ones, when I'm sitting with them in conversations, and I'm asking the right questions, I'm listening well, and I'm uncovering those kind of root issues. And then, I'm caring personally and I'm acting on those. So I feel like God's kind of shifted just how I approach a lot of those situations. And that's led to a whole host of things that we've talked about with culture and people and trust. And so, I think a lot of it, most people don't need they don't need a new system. They just need to be reminded they're part of something bigger, and they're valued and they matter, and their work matters, and what they do ultimately has eternal significance. So there's a lot of that wrapped into kind of how I've shifted the way I approach over the past year.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's something we can all learn to do more of. And it's a never ending thing, right? It's not like you get there. It's like we're doing that for the rest of our lives. So it's like, no matter where you're starting from, you can start doing more of that today. I mean, just on that note, kind of just one more final little question is, what would you say to someone who's listening, who feels called to lead, but maybe doesn't feel ready yet? Or maybe they're just an emerging creative leader, and like, what would you say to them to kind of get started on their journey?
Yeah, I think, one, I think you're never 100% ready. That's kind of the I guess the paradox here is like, you feel like you have to be ready to step into leadership, but no one's ever 100% ready, right? And that's exactly where kind of that faith and obedience collide to help you grow. And so I think I wasn't ready in 2016 when I stepped into sales leadership. I wasn't ready in 2021 when I stepped into Liberty University. But if you feel like you're actually being called into leadership, God's going to meet you in that obedience and taking that step, and he'll give you the wisdom and he'll equip you. But you also need to prepare. You also need to do the work on your end. And so stewarding what's right in front of you right now, because I didn't know in Cleveland, Ohio in 2016, what I was learning in leadership is what I would actually use 90% of the time over here in Lynchburg, Virginia. And so whatever he's placed in your hands now, steward that well. And if you feel like he's calling you to that kind of position in the future, then prepare for it. Get mentors, read the books, learn the things. I think a lot of people will wait until they have that position to then start leading. And it's like, you can lead right where you are without that title now. And you can also prepare yourself for that position. So I think there's a lot in that. And just in general, like, it's not about you. I think people have to remember that, is like, if you're chasing a shiny title or more control or status or whichever, like, a lot of people don't want to say that, but inherently that's kind of what they're like, oh, next level, people are going to see me, my image, reputation. You've already lost the whole plot if that's your goal. And so, again, it's about serving people. That's a lot of what you'll get from developing a leader within you with John Maxwell's servant leadership. And it's incredibly rewarding. It's messy. It can be chaotic. It can be stressful, but I think it's one of the most important things that someone can give their life to is figuring out how to unleash that potential and that God-given gift in somebody, and having a front row seat in that journey as they're building that confidence, that skill, and their purpose, and having a hand in kind of how they're impacting eternally and for the kingdom. So I would say a lot of that.
Yeah, really good, man. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we got to do it finally. And I'd love to dive into systems at some point of how you and your process. I don't know how we can present that, but maybe we can do something in the future on that. As for people who are wanting to connect with you, maybe there's people that are starting out their creative journey, creative leadership journey, or just want to know more about what you're doing. How can they connect with you specifically, but also maybe Liberty? Like, how would people get best connected to you?
Sure. I think the main thing is my Instagram, Matthew CRTV, which is supposed to be Matthew Creative, but however you want to pronounce that.
Everyone knows you as Matthew Creative. Don't worry.
Matthew Creative. I answer all my DMs, so just shoot me a DM. You can find all my other stuff out of there, like Behance and LinkedIn and whatnot, but it could all start at my Instagram. And then our Liberty account is Liberty OSD, are specifically for the Office of Spiritual Development. So you can see a lot of what's happening over there. But I would start with Instagram and just shoot me a DM. Like, I respond to all of them. So I'm looking forward to it.
There you go. Well, we were messaging last night about funny stuff. So
that's right.
I'm sure we'll be doing the same thing later on. All right. Well, thank you so much, Matthew, again, for joining us. I know you've got to go and get to work now. So appreciate you jumping on so early and spending the time with us and sharing all your wisdom. And you guys have been listening to the Church Circle podcast. We'll be back again next week with another episode with some more great leaders, creatives, pastors And I've got an exciting one coming up for you next week, so stay tuned. See you guys soon.